tell us about his organization as well as his meeting today with President Clinton regarding some of his concerns about the federal budget plan. We welcome your questions and comments. We will open up the phone lines shortly for you for this program with Representative Bernie Sanders.
Congressman Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont. Senator Mitchell and Speaker of the House Tom Foley announced a deal on a budget agreement. What's in the package?
Well, I suspect there are going to be a whole lot of pages, so I can't give you all the details, but let me give you an overview of what it is going to be in the package as I understand it. Number one, for the first time in many years, there's going to be a serious effort to reduce the deficit. We're talking about close to $500 billion in the next 5 years. That's not an insignificant sum of money. Second of all, we're going to reverse a policy which has been going on for a number of years, by which the rich have gotten a lot richer by receiving significant tax breaks. What this program does is finally say to the wealthiest people in this country, guess what? As a result of the huge tax breaks you got, that's one of the reasons why the deficit is so high. So we're going to ask you to start paying your fair share of taxes. And I think that's long overdue. And secondly, as part of that tax reform process, what this program says to the poor people, the working people, the low-income working people of this country, that's the people who are making $4.50 an hour, $5 an hour, $6 an hour. What we're going to say to those people is, you know what? It's time for you to have a tax break rather than the very rich. So we're looking at about $21 billion in earned income tax credits. And that means that there's going to be about a 50% expansion of that program, and that's going to be a real shot in the arm for many working people, especially those people with children. Thirdly, what we're looking at is a series of programs called the Children's Initiative. Steve, one of the disgraces in this country today is that the United States of America has by far the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. We're talking about 22% of the kids in America living in poverty. We're talking about 5 million children who are hungry on any given day. We're talking about millions of kids who haven't received their basic immunization shots. What this program does is make a major initiative to deal with childhood poverty. I think that's long overdue, and I think it's a step in the right direction. So what you're talking about is a major immunization program. You're talking about a significant expansion of the food stamp program, and you're talking about the Family Protection Act, which begins to deal with the horror of child abuse in America. So there's some pretty good things in the bill.
Good day from Washington. A couple of hours ago, Senate and House leaders announced a budget agreement. Republicans, led by Senator Bob Dole, said that they would not support the plan. More details will be coming out in the next few days. The president is expected to address the country Tuesday evening to talk about what it all means. Our guest for the next half hour is Congressman Sanders of Vermont. You met with the president earlier today as part of his own lobbying effort. What did he tell you?
Well, we had arranged the meeting. It wasn't part of his lobbying effort. It was our effort to say to him that we don't want to see more compromises in the Children's Initiative, and we don't want to see more compromises in the need to protect working people and poor people. The Progressive Caucus is a newly formed caucus which attempts to represent those people who really have been getting the short end of the stick for many, many years. So what we decided to do is bring together a number of members of Congress who was trying to stand up and represent ordinary people, working people, poor people, the elderly, against very powerful forces in this country who have dominated the political scene for many, many years. So we said to President Clinton and Vice President Gore, stand with the Children's Initiative. If you want our support, don't cut it back more. Stand with the Earned Income Tax Credit, which helps the working poor. If you want our support, you've got to protect that. We expressed some disappointment, for example, that there was not more of an increase in the corporate income tax. There was not more, in fact, increase in taxes for the very wealthy. We could have done away with the gas tax. That's my view. I don't think we need to do that, had needed to do that. But essentially, we asked him to stand with the children and the workers of America so they can get a fair shake.
How much would the average family earn that would see a higher tax rate?
What is going on now is that, and I think this is absolutely fair, the wealthiest 2% of the population, families in America, those earning $200,000 a year or more, would pick up 80% of the tax increases.
But the president initially said $115,000 for an individual and $140,000 for families.
What we're looking about now, I'm sorry, but
Is that still the cutoff?
No, I think what we're looking at now is couples making $180,000 a year and single individuals making $140,000 a year.
And there's also debate whether or not that would be retroactive to March or January.
I think that what they have concluded is that it would be retroactive to January.
How will this fly in Vermont?
I think in the polls that I've seen in my own state and throughout the country, people understand that the wealthy have ripped off the system during the last dozen years. I mean, everybody knows that during the 1980s, the richest 1% of our population saw an almost doubling of their income at the same time as their tax rates were reduced. Meanwhile, working people, by the tens of millions, saw a decline in their standard of living. But if you look at federal, state, and local taxes, their tax burden went up. I think the truth is that working people and poor people want to see the rich start paying their fair share of taxes and will applaud a program which lowers taxes on the working poor. I think it's going to play well in Vermont, and I think it's going to play well all over this country.
Congressman Sanders is originally from Brooklyn, New York. He is now in his second term in independent, the only independent in the U.S. House of Representatives.
The only in the first in 40 years, and we in Vermont are proud of that.
We
At least, you know, the people who support me are proud of it. I suppose our opponents are not proud of it. But
he is formerly a college professor, and we want to get to your phone calls in just a few minutes. You'll see the number on the bottom of your screen. But first, Senator Bob Dole earlier today on the Senate floor talking about the budget plan and how Republicans will deal with the issue.
Everybody wants to reduce the deficit. This is why we support a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. This is why Republicans favor the line item veto. We remain fundamentally opposed to the President's plan because we believe that the best way to reduce the deficit and move toward a balanced budget is to cut spending first. There are a lot of Americans who may be willing to make a sacrifice to reduce the deficit, but they're not willing to accept higher taxes for business as usual, and that's what this plan offers.
Congressman, will any Republicans, either in the House or the Senate, support the President's plan?
my understanding is that none will.
Why?
Well, they're going to give you a whole lot of rhetoric, but essentially the bottom line is they want to protect the interest of the very wealthy. This is a very progressive tax program. The richest 2% of the population are asked to contribute 80% of the new taxes. Mr. Dole and his friends are very upset about that because that's essentially the group of people that they represent. Furthermore, working people, low-income workers, are going to get a tax break. These guys, for years, supported tax breaks for the rich so that you now have a situation in America where the wealthiest 1% of the population owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. During the 1980s, almost all of the 50%, over half of the increased income in this country went to the richest 1 or 2% of the population. That's what Reaganomics was all about, and it was a disaster. The result of it was that the vast majority of our people became poorer, ordinary workers. You have 2 million people sleeping out on the street, and you have 5 million children who are hungry. You have 37 million Americans without any health insurance. That's the policies that those guys gave us. Now, I should tell you that as an independent, you're not going to hear me telling you, you know, lining up and saying Bill Clinton is great and Bill Clinton is doing all these wonderful things. I have strong disagreements with Mr. Clinton on a number of areas. But essentially what this is about is somebody is going to have to pay more in taxes. Should it be middle income and working people, or should it be the very rich? This program asks the very rich to pick up the lion's share of the burden, and that is absolutely appropriate.
One other biographical note, Congressman Sanders is the former mayor of Burlington, Vermont. That's how you began your political career.
So I was mayor for 4 terms and very proud of what we accomplished there.
We're going to get our first phone call. We also want to show you what's going on at Capitol Hill. From the steps out in front of the Capitol, you'll see some of the activity, including news reporters. This is Bob Franken of CNN, who is feeding his report out to CNN. And lots of other activity going on as the budget negotiations wrap up, and the process now is looking at what the details are. We'll get to your phone calls. Gainesville, Florida, you're next. Go ahead, please.
I don't believe we're taxed too much, Congressman. I believe we're taxed too little, we're taxed too much, and it's the spending that's the problem. And, Stephen, I appreciate if you wouldn't cut me off. How much will our debt be increased at the end of the 5 years if Mr. Clinton's plan goes through completely, which is not his plan, which has been cut and dissected 55 times by both Congress? 1 minute. How much will our debt be increased, sir?
I believe, I'm not sure. If your point is that the national debt will continue to rise, you're absolutely right. But at the end of 5 years, the deficit will be significantly lower than it is today.
Does that answer your question, caller?
Sir, not at all. Please, Stephen, don't cut me off. It's so difficult to get through to you.
That's why I'm keeping you on the line. Go ahead, follow up.
Okay, our debt will be increased by between $1 trillion and $1.5 trillion.
That's correct.
And it's because of the waste in government spending. Excuse me, sir, please. Mr. Reagan started a commission headed by Peter Grace, the Citizens Against Government Waste. Mr. Bowser, Charles Bowser, the chief accountant for the government, said that there's $300 billion in wasteful spending in the government every year. The Citizens Against Government Waste talk about $200 billion. Charles Martin Gross wrote a book called Government Record Waste from A to Z. He talks about maybe $500 billion that could be saved if you went to a zero-based budgeting. There is nothing in this plan that is going to reduce spending. As a matter of fact, Mr. Mitchell today said there will be no spending cuts until 3 or 4 years down the road. We will increase taxes retroactively, but no spending cuts till 3 or 4 years down the road, and then that's smoke and mirrors. Now that's the problem with the country. And the Senate, according to Sam Donaldson the other day, passed a bill or proposed a bill to reduce tea tasting, which is going to save the government $100 and some odd thousand a year. Right. Please.
Well, you see, the point is there waste in government? Of course there's waste in government. But let's be clear what the Republicans have in mind. It's not tea tasting for $100,000 or the Lawrence Welcome or other stupid programs like that. There is enormous waste. No one is arguing about it. But if you look at the Republicans' deficit reduction package, which includes no new taxes and only cuts, you're talking about slashing, devastating cuts in Medicare for the elderly, Medicaid for the poor, veterans programs, aid to education, aid to the homeless, and so forth and so on. There are real cuts which are going to make life much, much more difficult for the most vulnerable members of our society. So I think that's a program that I can't support. Should we eliminate the massive amounts of waste in government? Yes, we should. I personally voted against the supersonic collider. I don't think we can afford that now. I voted against the space station. I don't think we can afford that now. I am tomorrow going to bring on the floor of the House a 10%, an amendment to reduce the intelligence budget by 10%. I don't think we should level fund the intelligence bureaus. All right, so there's a lot of ways that we can go about cutting back programs which do not hurt the most vulnerable people in our society. But what the Republicans have come forward with are massive cutbacks on Medicare. In my own state of Vermont now, and throughout the country, you have elderly people today who cannot afford their basic health care needs. They can't afford their prescription drugs. Slashes in Medicare. Medicaid is in serious trouble. Cutbacks in Medicaid. Veterans who put their lives on the line. Massive cutbacks in veterans programs. I don't think we should be doing that in this country.
The lobbying was rather intense over the past couple of days, and now the details are being worked out on Capitol Hill. Vice President Al Gore is on Capitol Hill. What you're looking at now is a live picture of his limousine, part of the motorcade, in place on the Senate side. Others who are leading the White House effort include Budget Director Leon Panetta and Secretary of the Treasury Lloyd Bentsen, former senator from Texas. As we get another call from Bricktown, New Jersey. Good evening.
Hi, C-SPAN. Love you. Mr. Sanders, I want you to know where I'm coming from. My husband and I have been married 21 years. We never made more than $43,000 between the two of us. You keep bringing up the fact that the rich are bad people. Now, you people in the Congress allowed them to have those breaks that you're talking about. It wasn't just President Reagan. And the other thing is, I came from Hungary in 1956 during the revolution. My father brought us over here to have freedom, not only freedom to say what you want, but also economic freedom. And now I find that my children, who are college age now, they have to work 5 months out of the year to pay their taxes. Now, I don't call that economic freedom, and you can't blame it all on the rich. You could blame it on the people that let them have those advantages, which was Congress.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Okay, I don't think you heard me call anybody bad. Certainly rich people are any quote-unquote bad than poor people or anybody else. You judge people on their character, on the way they live their lives, and not on the amount of money that we have. I think the issue is an issue of justice, and whether we think it's appropriate in this country that the nation moves to what almost amounts to an oligarchy, and that is you have some people with incredible wealth, while a vast majority of the people continue to see a decline in their standard of living. When you talked about you have college-age young people, well, so do I in my family, and you should know that there are millions of young people in America who can't afford to go to college, because the incomes of their family are such that they're unable to pay the ever-rising cost of college tuition. So I think what we're fighting for is a little bit of justice. No one is saying rich people are bad. Some of us are saying that it is wrong that the very rich continue to get much, much richer, while middle income and working people continue to see a decline in their standard of living. And what we're talking about is justice. Now, you mentioned that it was not just Ronald Reagan who instituted the tax breaks for the rich, and you're absolutely correct. Now, I was not in Congress at that time. I certainly would have voted against that. But the point right now is we've got to undo some of the damage of the 1980s and give working people and the working poor a break which they have long deserved. They really need that break. We've got to fight for that.
Headline from one of the newspapers. This is the Los Angeles Times with a picture of Senator David Bourne, who announced yesterday on CBS's Face the Nation that he would not go along with the president's budget plan. He did vote originally in the Senate. Our next call on the original budget plan. He will not vote on the plan when it comes up later in the week. Our next call is from Los Angeles. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. President Clinton has not kept any promise from his when he was a candidate. What did he promise you to go along with him and vote for this scheme of his?
But President Clinton didn't promise me anything. You know, let me just say a word on promises kept and so forth. And again, as an independent, I'm not a Democrat, so I don't want to spend my whole time defending President Clinton. For 12 years, you had presidents who were very, very good with photo opportunities. They were very good with rhetoric. And yet the most important issues facing this country, the deficit, health care, the decline of our economy, were not dealt with. They were not even seriously debated. Now, while I happen to disagree very strongly with President Clinton on health care, I believe in a single-payer Canadian-style system. President Clinton supports the NAFTA agreement. I'm very much opposed to the NAFTA agreement. President Clinton deserves credit for having the guts to at least address and debate and force discussion on the most important issues facing this country. 20 years ago, this nation led the world in terms of the wages and benefits we provided our workers. We were number one. Today, we are in 12th place in the world and in rapid decline. Now, we can do photo opportunities, we can do all kinds of nonsensical rhetoric, but that's the ultimate reality. How do you rebuild America? How do you really deal with the deficit? To Clinton's credit, at least, he is trying to address those issues. So,
New Haven, Connecticut.
Sir, good evening. Good evening, Mr. Saunders.
good evening.
Mr. Saunders, first of all, I'm 56 years old, and all my life I've been hearing the same squabble about the economy and the budget and the deficit. And no matter whether there's a Democrat in or a Republican in, it still goes up and up and up, and they still say the same thing. They're going to cut the budget. When the Democrats are in, they say they're going to hit the rich. When the Republicans are in, they say they're not going to tax. And you, as an independent, should realize this better than anyone. Now, I've been watching the congressional votings, and I've noticed that the independent voter in the House has always voted with the Democrats. Now, I want to ask a basic question. Are you independent or Democrat?
Well, you see, I'm very proud of being the only independent, but I have two choices, and that is the Democratic position or the Republican position. As it happens, I don't always vote with the Democrats. On occasion, I vote with the Republicans. But often, given the alternatives, while the Democratic alternative is not the kind of alternative that I would like to see, I tend to vote with the Democrats more than with the Republicans.
Orlando, Florida, you're next. Good evening, caller. We lost that call. Let me read you a quote from the Wall Street Journal, today's edition. It talks about the factionalism among the Democrats in trying to bring together a budget deal. And it begins, it's written by John Harwood. He says that whenever Representative Tim Penny starts getting comfortable with President Clinton's deficit reduction program, Congressman Bernie Sanders starts getting queasy. Goes on to say that Mr. Sanders is a feisty socialist from Vermont. He worries that the package spent too little to begin with on the needy. How do you and other more liberal members of the House deal with the more conservative elements in trying to bring this package together, something that you can all agree on?
I think Tim Penny happens to be one of the better members of the House. I disagree with Tim on a number of things. But Tim's feeling is that we've got to cut program after program after program, and he's played a very important role in that effort, and it is not uncommon for me to vote with him. On the other hand, as I've indicated earlier, I think that right now, when you're talking about the nation on earth, which has the greatest gap between the rich and the poor, when you're talking about 5 million children in America being hungry today, when people are sleeping out on the streets, when we're having a collapse in our school systems from one end of this country to the other, when you're having a tremendous growth in crime because people are in despair, and you have police departments that don't have the manpower that they need, I think it is silly to say that we're not going to address those problems. So the difference between Tim Penny and me is that I will vote to make significant cuts in military spending. I'm going to vote tomorrow and lead the effort to cut money for the intelligence budget. I don't think we can afford a space station. I'm going to cut back on the supersonic collider. I led the effort so that we don't put the $500 billion savings and loan bailout onto the backs of the worker and all of us and increase the deficit. That's where I would cut. But I must be very frank and tell you that when so many of our people, our elderly people, our children, our working people, are hanging on by their fingernails, when you're talking about millions of people in this country who are hungry, I am not going to cut back on those programs. That is not what a civilized nation must do. And when it comes to asking the wealthy to start contributing to the overall good of this nation, I think that they should. I think, frankly, it is obscene that you have chief executive officers in this country who now make 157 times what their workers make. That is the largest gap in the entire industrialized world. 157 times more income for the CEO than for the worker. That is nonsense. So I think we need to realign priorities in America. We think we need to fight for social justice. So the difference between Mr. Penny and myself is that I will cut. I will vote for massive cuts. This congressman is not going to vote for the S&L bailout, which is brought to us by crooks wearing fancy three-piece suits. I'm not voting for that.
Will Tim Penny vote for this plan?
I think you'd better ask Tim Penny. I don't want to speak for Mr. Penny.
How do you think he'll vote?
Don't know.
We'll show you another scene from Capitol Hill as the discussion continues this evening for the president's budget plan that has been in the works for the past few months. Next call from New Orleans, Louisiana.
Yes, sir. I wanted to ask two questions. The first being, I wanted to know if the administration and you understood the doctrine of the Laffer curve. If you're going to tax the top 1% of the wealthiest people, are you actually going to produce any revenues?
Yes. Yes, you are.
Wealthy people would seem to divert their income into tax breaks and tax municipal bonds and things like that.
Well, there will be that effort. You're absolutely right. I remember last month talking with an accountant in the state of Vermont who's already beginning his efforts to try to shelter the money of the wealthy people and so forth. They try to divert it out of taxes. But nonetheless, the reason that this policy and this program and progressive taxation is being fought so vigorously is obviously the rich are against it, and the rich do not want to pay their fair share of taxes. So yes, they will be paying more in taxes, significantly more.
Bridgeport, West Virginia.
Yes, Mr. Saunders, I also want you. You're very easy to follow, and you always vote with the Democrats. And actually, you're a socialist, and this country isn't buying socialism. Now, I just watched Cesno on CNN, and he had two experts from the left and the right, and he put all these questions to them. It will not create jobs. It will not reduce the deficit. And I just don't know how you can sit there and say that it will. And what you're trying to do is cause class warfare in this country, and we don't need it because we like to be rich. We'd like to get rich. I'm not rich, believe me, because I've got one child. My husband never made more than $1,000 a month, but yet I can put aside, he just retired 2 years ago, and I can put aside enough money to get an income from stocks we've purchased. And now you guys want to come along and take it away from us. I never took anything from the government in welfare or anything. I took student loans to put my child through college, and I'll be paying them for the rest of their life. And as far as your little program you have to put kids through college, I hope you get their end of it first, because we have people that have gone through law school and medical school on promise of giving their 2 years at the other end to the needy, and they had programs on 60 Minutes about they never fulfill their end of the deal. It's a little too inconvenient for them.
Caller, I'm going to stop you there. Thanks for phoning in. Congressman Sanders?
You know, what makes me a little bit sad is that the people who own the system and the people who own the media have done an extraordinarily good job. I don't mind when people who are wealthy, who are going to be asked to pay more in taxes, fight back. All right, that's understandable. But what is disturbing is that a lot of working people have swallowed that line themselves. And what they don't understand is that during the 1980s, their taxes went up, their ability to send their kids to college went down, their housing bills went up, their insurance premiums went significantly up. All of these problems accrued to them, and then the system has worked itself so that you have working people defending the interest of the very wealthy. And I think that's pretty sad. But I would disagree with that woman. I think, in fact, the reason that George Bush was defeated is that people finally, after 12 years, caught on to what Reaganomics was about. And it was a massive fraud. What it was a shift of hundreds of billions of dollars from poor and working people to the very rich. And finally, people caught on. Now, the woman says she doesn't like class warfare. Nobody likes class warfare. Nobody is advocating class warfare. But class warfare is exactly what has been going on in this country for the last dozen years. When you have children who are hungry, at the same time as the richest people in the country enjoy a huge increase in their income, that is class warfare. When you have profitable corporations closing down in America and moving to Mexico and Asia, where they can hire workers for 50 cents an hour or $1 an hour and throw people who have worked for that company out on the streets after years of service, that is class warfare. When millions of people cannot afford to go to a doctor or a hospital in this country, and we are the only nation in the industrialized world not to have a national health care system, while other people, wealthy people, can enjoy the best quality health care in the entire world, that is class warfare. So no one here is advocating class warfare. What we are talking about is that class warfare has gone on in this country for the last dozen years. And in fact, in my view, the wrong side has been winning that war. And what we want to do now is to give a little bit of help to working people, middle-income people, hungry children, people who are sleeping out on the street. Give them a fair shot in the American dream. It is not fair that the wealthy gets. I talked at Yale, spoke at Yale 6 months ago. I think the tuition or the expenses at Yale, $29,000 a year. How many middle-income families, working-class families, can send their kid to school at those type of costs? Should every kid in America have the opportunity to get a college education? Yeah, I think so. But you're going to need the government to play a role to do that. And one of the ways you do that is you have to raise taxes. And if you raise taxes, it should be upper-income people who pay the lion's share, not middle-income or working people.
Congressman Sanders will be with us a few more minutes. Sacramento, you're next. Thanks for waiting.
Oh, hello, Bernie Sanders, Congressman. I was wondering if you were aware of the capital gains tax in socialist Sweden. Do you have any idea what that is?
No, I don't. And Sweden is not social.
Zero.
Yeah.
It happens to be zero in Finland, too.
Mm-hmm.
The capital gains in Canada, which has socialized medicine. Do you have any idea what that is?
No.
Well, if you buy a house in Canada for $20,000 and you sell it for $2 million, the gain is not taxed at all. It is yours.
Mm-hmm.
Now, somehow these socialist countries that everybody like you wants this country to become,
I'm going to jump in just for a minute. I just want to let our viewers know that's Vice President Gore, who is leaving Capitol Hill. He was meeting earlier in the day, throughout much of the afternoon and early evening hours, working on the details of the House-Senate budget plan. If you've just joined us, they did reach an agreement. The compromise announced about an hour and a half or 2 hours ago by Speaker of the House Tom Foley and Senator George Mitchell. The President will have more to say tomorrow in the Roosevelt Room at the White House when he will be talking further about the plan. He's also expected to address the nation tomorrow evening, and the vote in the House and the Senate is expected to come this Thursday and Friday. We'll go back to your call. Thanks for being patient, caller.
Now, the point is, Mr. Sanders, is that some of these socialist countries have figured out a way to keep their companies modern to pay for all these wonderful programs that you want to enact. Now, you know, a lot of people look at this capital gains as, wow, the millionaires are going to be really raking in. It's not the millionaires. It's the fact that if you want to have a modern society, you got to have a way of paying for it. And the best way to do that is to allow companies to modernize. And you can't do that when, you know, we tax our corporations so badly. You know, last week I was in Canada, and when I explained to them that we tax dividends 40% off the top, and then it's 100% to the taxpayer what he receives,
Okay.
They couldn't believe it.
Can I jump in and just make a quick response? The gentleman says that we tax corporations so badly. I'm sure that the gentleman knows that the percentage of revenue coming into the federal government today from the corporate tax is significantly less than it was 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. And in fact, during those days, this country led the world, was #1 in terms of the standard of living. Our people today we're in number 12th place. I don't know that there is a correlation between the points that you make.
We have time for one more call. Ypsilanti, Michigan. Go ahead, please.
Yes, this is the first time I called the show. I watched your show and I like it.
Thanks, caller. If you could turn the volume down on your set, that's why we're getting the echo. We'll be able to hear you a lot better.
Yeah, okay. Well, what I was calling about to the Representative Sanders there, I'd like to commend you because you are one of those that I watched up on the Hill and by watching the show that are willing to stand up to Bob Dole and the rest of those peoples up there that are wealthy, that are taken away. I'm a Vietnam veteran. Come home, I put 3 kids through college. I have a 10-year-old that I'm working with, and it's hard for me to save money now to try to, put aside for his education. And I was explaining to him that if we didn't have people like you that will stand up and let a poor man like me, who only make $25,000 a year, try to have a place for him to get an education, then we're going to be in bad shape. Somebody needs to do something. I think President Clinton is really trying. At least he's putting forth one package while some other people have said, don't they tell him not doing anything.
Thanks.
I'm going to hang up the phone and listen to you.
Thanks for calling. Congressman?
I think the gentleman is quite right, and I commend him. There's so many people in this country who are making $20,000, $30,000 a year who are struggling every day. Here's a man making $25,000 a year putting kids through college. And I think it is obligatory on the part of the United States government to stand with people like that, with brave and courageous people who know the value of education, who are fighting for their kids' lives. And we must not turn our backs and say that only the wealthy can afford to go to college. Only the wealthy can afford good quality health care. Only the wealthy can afford good housing. That's not what democracy is about. Now, one of the callers pointed up earlier that she thought that, people were becoming more and more conservative in this country. I don't think so. I think one of the things that makes me very sad is that we have the lowest voter turnout of any industrialized nation on earth. In the last election, when people said, oh, the turnout was really good, 45% of the people didn't vote. In this off-presidential election that's going to come up in a year and a half, I would guess 45% of the American people are going to vote. Vast majority of the people are not going to vote. You know who doesn't vote? Poor people don't vote. Working people don't vote because they're so disgusted. They're so frustrated with a lack of action on the part of government to protect their interests. And very often they're giving Tweedledee, Tweedledum choice between Democrats and Republicans. All right. So I think that if this country is going to be saved, if we're going to turn it about, if we're going to have decent jobs for our kids, if we're going to have a national health care system, if we're going to put people to work cleaning up the environment, if we're going to make sure that everybody has a college education who has the ability to get one, we're going to need to bring poor people and working people into the political system. If you're in trouble now, you can sit back and you can let Bob Dole and the other people make the decisions. I would suggest not to do that. I would suggest that working people and poor people get involved, start fighting for their rights and the rights of their kids.
Before we let you go, the House vote is on Thursday. How will it break down?
I suspect that the Clinton will win.
By what margin?
It'll be close.
Congressman Sanders, independent from Vermont, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
We are going to continue discussing the budget deal, which was announced earlier today. Coming up next, we'll be talking to Congressman Phil Crane.